Is Jerome Powell a criminal? The dollar just survived one of its weirdest nights in history, and while we were sleeping, the Fed chair was handed 2 subpoenas. The S&P 500 went into free fall for a short amount of time, but quickly rebounded. And here is why the war between the White House and the Federal Reserve is about to change the value of every person's bank account forever. All this started with two people with a dumb idea. Let's get Jerome Powell out of office. Jeanine Pirro and Donald Trump, one slightly more important than the other. Trump, despite appointing Jerome Powell, has wanted for a while to get rid of him because he wants interest rates lower. And interest rates is just a cost to borrow money. He thinks that this will stimulate the economy. He says, no inflation. Prices of gasoline, energy, and groceries are down. Everything's down. The economy is good. The Fed must lower the rate, like Europe and China have. What is wrong with too late Powell? Again, he says, it's the perfect time to cut. The ADP number is out. We have to cut. This has made Trump go from nominating him, calling him his best friend, to actively wanting to fire him and wishing for his downfall, which has led to some very funny moments between the couple.
A fool of integrity and good judgment. Guy's grossly incompetent. Accordingly, it is my pleasure and my honor to announce my nomination.
I was surprised he was appointed.
To be the next chairman of the Federal Reserve. I would fire him.
Not permitted under the law.
I'd love to fire his ass.
Not permitted under the law.
And he should be sued. He's spending more money than any building has ever spent.
Yeah, you just added in a third building is what that is.
Jerome Powell.
Too late, Powell.
Congratulations, Jane.
So, Donald, I would love to fire Jerome Powell. Trump is on the warpath. This is despite Trump's own project being a couple $100 million of a cost overrun. And Jerome Powell's project is only a couple $100 million off of a cost overrun. To be honest, every single federal project has cost overruns. It's almost impossible to have a federal project that doesn't have cost overruns. And I just want to put this in perspective, that how little this money actually means to the US government. So it's not like $300 million actually means anything to the federal government. So the daily interest payments are $2.6 billion. So that's more than the entirety of the Federal Reserve project, which is a bunch of buildings, bunch of staff, bunch of renovations for the most complex financial system in the world. Keep that in mind. So this is a pretext to fire him. I don't think there's any better way to put this than how this guy describes it. The president demanding lower interest rates in order to reduce the federal cost of borrowing with no regard for inflation is the textbook case for why central bank independence is important. And this is an experiment that's already been tried in history where a president sets the interest rates. And we can look in recent US history in the last 70 years of what happened. This guy on the left, Arthur Burns, smoking a pipe, not that cool. This guy, Richard Nixon, Watergate, you know him. This guy bullied Arthur Burns, the Federal Reserve chairman, into lowering interest rates so that he could win an election. He wanted lower interest rates so that it would seem in the short term that everything was going fine. And for a while, well, not for a while, for a year or two, it did work, and the economy was going pretty well. But because Arthur Burns didn't use data to make the decision, instead he used a politician to make this decision, it led to an era of stagflation. And stagflation is when you can imagine prices of everything going up and no one has a job. So this might sound familiar to nowadays. Here's the inflation in the 70s and early 80s, around 10 to 14%. That's ridiculous. And it was all caused by Arthur Burns, somewhere around here. Lowering interest rates at the wrong time, actually around here, but lowering interest rate at the wrong time means there's more money. So when the Federal Reserve lowers interest rates, they're essentially printing money, giving it to the system, and allowing lending. Once all productive things are taken up with the amount of money that it can hold, it has to go to speculative things. And this led to a housing crash, or not a housing crash, a housing bubble, similar to what we might describe in 2008. People bought houses not only to live, but to protect and grow their wealth. My grandfather, rest his soul, got caught up in one of these schemes and quit his job as an accountant at Chevron and bought 8 houses off of one of his houses because interest rates were so low. And he speculated. He speculated on all of them. He leveraged his home, and the price increase was 170%, which seems like unreal returns. So why wouldn't you just put more money in it? And that's what everyone did. They started speculating, and it was euphoric. But right after a crack binge, what happens? You crash if you don't have more crack. Paul Volcker stepped in and he said, the American economy doesn't need crack anymore. What we need is water. What we need is a little sleep. And it absolutely destroyed the housing boom that was happening, or the housing bubble that was happening. This guy, cool. He has a cigar, unlike that other guy. And he raised interest rates, the cost to borrow money, to 15%, to 20%. He was ridiculous. He was ridiculously unpopular, but he was economically beneficial, and everyone who's serious about economics really respects this guy because he had the guts to tell people no, and to say, no, we're going to take the pain now so that we can benefit from these years later on. We are benefits of Paul Volcker's work back in the 70s and 80s. But this is what happened to my grandfather's. He lost all 8 of the houses and kept the smallest one. And he had to go back and work for Chevron because he couldn't speculate anymore. This is not Paul Volcker's fault. This is importantly Arthur Burns' fault. Arthur Burns' fault for causing a speculative bubble, which led people to believe that the value of things was more than what it actually was. So, the lesson that we learned is that politicians should not be able to influence a central bank. That's why we want an independent central bank. So, regardless if you're Nixon or Trump, you should not influence. Not probably, you should not. Because it always leads to worse results. And we can look at global politicians, because we don't want to have some sort of United States bias. These two guys, the recently, I don't know if he's still technically a president, but he was a president at one point. Maduro and Erdogan of Venezuela and Turkey, respectively. And what happened after Maduro got rid of their central banker? Insane inflation. 1,300% inflation. This is how much it cost to buy one chicken. So, yeah, it's a little ridiculous. I don't want to have to pay for a meal in $100 bills. I think these might be $billion bills or something. At 130% inflation is crazy. Yeah. Maduro was elected here. Got rid of the banker here. So it's kind of easy to see what happened is he printed so much money, and it led to worse results for everybody. It's unstable. Erdogan did the same thing. Erdogan wanted to win an election. So about right here, he fired 3 central bankers in a row because the first 3 wouldn't comply with him. And the third one did, and inflation climbed to 65% year over year. So every time it's tried, if you test the independence of a Federal Reserve Bank and you get control of it, it's basically economic collapse. The value of the currency collapses as politicians, not bankers, print more and more money to boost their economy. And for the record, people will say that, well, the stock market was doing well. This is true. The stock market in these countries did well, but that's only because the money had to find a place to go. And oftentimes it finds itself in assets. The value of the assets doesn't change, but the value of money does. If you print more money will be chasing the same asset. So that it looks like the value of the asset is going up, but you're actually just keeping the same purchasing power that you had before if you have the same asset. So it's a situation like this, is if inflation is 13% and stocks are up 12%, you've actually lost a percentage, right? So President Trump has not learned this lesson. and he wants to lower interest rates, and he will do anything to get it, including try to blackmail the Federal Reserve chairman. This is a stupid thing to say. When the market goes up, the Federal Reserve should lower interest rates. That is against every economic theory. I agree with him. You don't own enough assets. Maybe considering get some more assets after this. So we're not going to get a Paul Volcker type situation. In fact, it'd be impossible for the U.S. government to raise interest rates to around 14% because of how much debt the U.S. government has. If they raise it to 14%, the amount that they spend on interest would be like ridiculous. It'd be like half the government budget. So it's unfeasible to do. So we're not going to get that. And we are going to get 2 replacements for Jerome Powell. These 2 Kevins. It's really unimportant who they are because it could be Kevin Malone, who is the Federal Reserve Chairman, because it's actually Donald Trump who's going to be the Federal Reserve Chairman. The new Fed Chairman is going to have to consult with Trump on every single rate cut, is what Trump has said. And both of these guys, both these Kevins, we should just put Kevin Malone here anyways. They've said that they will do this. They've said privately to him that they'll consult him for rate cuts, which is a horrible thing. It's going to make Jerome Powell's printing look amateur, really. Jerome Powell, he's got to be small change compared to what they're about to print. And so this has led to some backlash. If Trump hadn't tried to dispose of Jerome Powell this early, then he might have had a greater chance at getting his picks through. But people are starting to notice that this might be bad if Trump gets his picks through. So a couple of Republicans are vowing to not vote for his picks, including Senator Tom Tillis and Lisa Murkowski, who are people that I guess I respect after this. And here are the odds on pod market after Trump announced it. Trump announced somewhere here, right? And ever since then, it's this direction. That senators won't approve his nominees. So it's put the win in the sails of Jerome Powell. Jerome Powell's punch with the 2-minute video that was very apolitical was excellent. He's our GOAT. I just wanted to end with this note. Assets are an important thing to buy, especially nowadays. If inflation reaches new highs in the next year or two because Trump gets his appointees in, then you're going to want to have assets that are real and tangible. Maybe gold, silver, you have some stocks, you have a house, anything that will preserve value, not a car. Stay safe out there. Hope you enjoyed the video.